Welcome to another installment of Ty Burr's Watchcast, an audio outbuilding of the Substack newsletter Ty Burr's Watch List. Today, we are continuing with our new series of podcasts that I am calling Classics of the New Millennium, conversations devoted to those movies that have come out since the year 2000 and can legitimately or arguably be called great. The arguing, by the way, is very much the point. My guests will include the smartest and most well-known film critics currently working, among others, in various parts of the film industry. And for our second episode, I am delighted to welcome my friend and recent Sundance flatmate, Jason Bailey. Jason is a film critic and historian with bylines at the New York Times, where he writes the video-on-demand What to Watch columns, Vulture, Slate, Rolling Stone, and The Playlist, among others. He's a member of the New York Film Critics Circle and the editor-in-chief of the website Crooked Marquee. He's also the author of 5 books, most recently Fun City Cinema, New York City, and the Movies That Made It, which is an excellent read. I recommend it. There it is. There's the plug.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Bailey.
Welcome, Mr. Burr. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, I know you're drinking lousy coffee. You can at least compare Park City.
Yeah.
When I asked you which movie you wanted to pick to discuss as one of the great films of the new millennium, you didn't bat an eye. You just went straight to Ocean's 11. It was already lodged in there as your number one for the millennium to date.
Yeah.
And I'm, of course, talking about the 2001 Steven Soderbergh remake of the 1960 Rat Pack heist movie. So, first off, why? Why that film above all others? What does it mean to you? Tell us what that film, where it occupies in your list of classics.
Right. Oh, yeah. And I should clarify that. Like, I'm not going to do today is make the case that it is the single finest cinematic achievement of the past 23 years. Like, obviously, there have been better, objectively great movies that sort of outshine it. But Oceans to me is sort of, there is no movie from this century that I am just more likely to watch. That I just am more likely to be like reminded through the course of a day of something about it that will make me say, I'm just going to put that on tonight, like while I'm working, while I'm cleaning, while I'm whatever. Or, that I am more likely to just, when I'm in the mood to relax, that I'm more likely to reach for. So, you can call that a comfort movie, and I suppose it falls into that realm. But, and I guess I'll do this first. My sort of my personal history with it is kind of specific. When it came out, I was very much in a Soderbergh, like, I go through a really sort of obsessive phases with directors. Mm-hmm. And I had been aware of Soderbergh. I was a little too young for Sex Lies when it first came out, but I saw it on video a couple of years later. I was very taken with it. I loved his companion book, because this is when I wanted to be a filmmaker. Mm-hmm. So his companion book, which I checked out about 1,000 times from the Wichita Public Library, was a great read and a really fascinating peek at just like how an indie movie comes together in the late 1980s. But he had his sort of a wilderness period after that film, which actually I wrote a piece about for the late great The Dissolve. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of interesting work in there and a lot of experimentation, but nothing that hit the way that one did. And then when I went to Out of Sight, I was just like, I just fell in love, as I think a lot of film goers my age and older and younger did. Like,
well, I think that's his first mature work, really.
Yeah.
After the success of Sex Lies and Videotape, which I don't think even he expected.
No.
And then he's given carte blanche, and he cleans out the pipes with a bunch of weird stuff. Schizopolis, Kafka, King of the Hill, which is a very, very good
wonderful film.
But with Out of Sight, he says, "Okay, I'm here for keeps."
Yeah, and that was. It was interesting, too, because when that film came out, it was very much sort of marketed as being in the Pulp Fiction mold. And it's what I think is great about that movie is that, like, that debt is clear, and it's clear in the source material, like, because it's based on a Leonard novel, and Tarantino's always been very open about Leonard's influence, and he had just put out Jackie Brown, 6 months earlier.
Yep.
But that it also is doing other things and doing its own thing, and was one of the few films that I think you can pinpoint in that post-Pulp Fiction period of sort of rampant Tarantino riffs and ripoffs that genuinely took it somewhere new and interesting and fresh. And the central relationship in that movie is far more complicated and deeply felt than anything in the Tarantino filmography to that point, except Jackie Brown, which had just come out a couple months earlier. So, and I was also, because I loved Tarantino so much, I was all in on Elmore Leonard. I had spent the previous year reading a stack of Elmore Leonard paperbacks that my uncle bought me from a used bookstore,
Nice.
So I'd read the book of Out of Sight. I loved the book, and I went in and I was just floored, and it was easily for me the best film of 98. And then, he just embarks on this incredible run of films that are staggeringly inventive and energetic and thoughtful, and oh god, so he fought,
but and he plays with genre in ways that both pay tribute to them and explodes them at the same time. And I'm just looking at the filmography here. Follows Out of Sight with The Limey, and the other thing that it's he really follows the one for me, one for you. One
Absolutely.
for the audience, one for me. There's The Limey, and then followed by Aaron Brockovich, which is a big hit and Oscar winner, and Traffic in the same year. And then Ocean's 11. So he has absolutely established his commercial bona fides. And then he goes off and does Full Frontal. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
And Solaris, remaking a Tarkovsky movie with George Clooney, and it's not a bad movie. And then the other experimental stuff, Bubble, The Girlfriend Experience.
Love The Girlfriend Experience.
Haywire, but within that you get, really wonderful things like The Informant, which is probably the funniest thing that David's ever done. You get Contagion, which I think is a really, really good pandemic movie. The Magic Mike movies. And then, as we get into the new millennium, well, actually, it's all in the new millennium. As we get into the last decade, you have stuff like Logan Lucky, and the stuff he's doing now for streaming is actually, I think, some of the best stuff he's done.
I agree.
High Flying Bird, The Laundromat, not so much, but No Sudden Move and Kimmy are
two of the stellar.
Yeah. And we talked about how we really feel he's kind of the Howard Hawks of his generation.
Absolutely. And but the fact that he, I think it's a fascinating career. I will make it back to Ocean's 11 on this, but I want to divert briefly. That it's a fascinating career in that he's always been, I think maybe more than anybody else, so transparent about his process, about the movie business, and about how the business and how they collide. And
very smart about how he works within that. And works within it, yet keeping his distance from the business.
Exactly. And has been sort of, I think, painfully candid about the difficulty he's had finding his way in the current paradigm. Has given these, really open interviews and lectures and things where he just talks about, like, this is what the movie business is now. Right. It is more commercialized and businessized and, than it's ever been. And, and although he won't come out and say it, like, clearly at some point in his career recently, he had to, like, make a choice as to, am I going to, for lack of an easier villain, make Marvel movies? Or am I going to find a place for the kind of work I want to do, even if it means I don't have, the modern equivalent of Aaron Brockovich and Traffic out in the same year, that like, that I'm going to find a place for myself in streaming where I can, like, make a deal with HBO Max where I can just make whatever fucking movie I want. And maybe it's not going to, like, penetrate the popular culture the way it would have 20 years ago, but at least I'm making the movie I want to make.
At the same time, I would argue that having a movie of his on Netflix or HBO Max gets it to a far broader audience.
That's true. That's true.
Without the hype. And that's where I think he also functions as sort of as on a Hoxian level, where he's
Absolutely
making the stuff he wants to make. He's being an absolute professional. He's getting it straight to the audience. He's working within a huge range of genres, and yet bringing a very recognizable stamp to it without making auteur's pronouncements. And I think it's a brilliant. Remember when he announced that he was quitting the business? He was retiring. And that lasted less than a year. And I think that reflected his despair of being not an artist, but a smart, engaged, curious filmmaker trying to work within a system that only wants to turn out blockbusters based on intellectual property. So
yes,
exactly. Where do you go? Well, right now, streaming is giving him money to do these not huge, idiosyncratic movies that work as entertainment, but are also really smart. So sure, he's going to be there. So I'm seeing the new Magic Mike. It was a Magic Mike's Last Dance, I think it is. That's opening. I'm seeing it tomorrow. It's opening on Friday. He directed the first one, didn't direct the second one, which showed. And he is directing the third one, and so I'm looking forward. But that's his first theatrical movie in quite some time.
Yeah, in a hot minute.
And it's a scene tellingly.
Yeah. Well, I get his despair too. I'll never forget the moment when I decided I was done ever trying to predict box office. Was when I went to a press screening of Logan Lucky, was deliriously entertained for 2 hours, came out and said, well, that's going to be a giant hit. That's Soderbergh. That's the Ocean's 11 director making another heist movie. That's Channing Tatum, his Magic Mike star, who everybody loves. Adam Driver's in it. James Bond is in it. This movie's going to make $1 gajillion. And it came out and did bupkis, and I was just like, and if I were Steven Soderbergh, this is a hell of a thought experiment, but if I were Steven Soderbergh and I made a movie as inherently crowd pleasing as Logan Lucky, that's also as good as Logan Lucky is, and it came out and tanked, I would be ready to be done with the business too. And that was his comeback after retirement movie.
Right.
Like that was the one he made after he thought he had figured it out, Well,
that's, and that's reflected, I think, in the stuff he's doing for streaming.
Absolutely.
Because it's not reaching for the stars. It's not trying to be a hit. It's not trying to market itself. It's just trying to be good stuff. He's just addressing himself to a work. Let's talk about Ocean's 11.
I'm sorry, yes.
We never extensively
but no,
talk about
because I do. So what reminded me of all of this was the fact that, like, even at that point in his career, when he's on top of the world, like that, he will never be hotter, and few directors will ever be hotter as he was in 2000 when he puts out Aaron Brockovich, which is a giant moneymaker, critically acclaimed, wins Julia Roberts an Oscar. He puts out Traffic at the end of the year, which makes a fairly good amount of money itself.
Yep.
This extremely influential stylistically and narratively, like people are still making Traffic ripoffs. Gets an Oscar for another actor in the same year. Gets Benicio del Toro Best Supporting Actor. He's up against himself. He's nominated twice for Best Director that year. And then wins one of them, which was like a surprise because often that's happened before and the directors just sort of cancel each other out. But he wins it for Traffic. And I'll never forget this. They interviewed him on the day that the nominations came out, and he was on the set of Ocean's 11. And whoever was there from EW or whatever, went to get a quote from him about this incredible, he's part of history now, one of the few directors to ever have this double nomination, and all of his actors are front runners and so forth. And they was like, how do you feel? And I don't recall the direct quote, but it was basically like, I'm just trying to figure out where I'm going to move the camera in this shot. That like all of that was a nice sort of icing on the cake, but he still had work to do that day.
And that's something we always forget with the Oscars, is that they are coming out, up to, months after the film comes out, which itself is months and months after people are on the set. It is so far in the past for these.
Yeah. And so this movie comes out, and I'm extremely hyped because I'm Mr. Soderbergh. I can't wait to see it. I'm there opening night, and it really was like everything I wanted it to be.
That's a great audience picture too.
Oh my God, yes, and full house Friday night opening night audience. At the biggest and most beautiful movie theater in Wichita, Kansas, which I say not in a shitty way. Like, we actually had this great chain of theaters called the Warren Theaters, which are like luxury movie houses, and it just played like gangbusters. And then my history with it then continued, and part of the reason that it is my comfort movie the way that it is that this was also the era in which, like many a young film fan, youngish, I was about 24, 25, I was working at a video store. And the video store that I worked for Blockbuster at that time. And, they always wanted us during sort of busy days, busy times, primetime rush, et cetera, to play the stupid trailer tapes. But I always worked Sunday day, and on Sunday day, they would like sort of be lax about it and let us kind of watch whatever we wanted as long as it was PG.
Right.
Well, Ocean's 11 is not PG. It's PG-13, but it's only PG-13 for one Elliot Gould F-bomb.
Right.
And so I knew when that came, and no matter what I was doing, if I was on the floor or whatever, I would like make my way back to behind the counter, and just pod the audio for the PA down when it hit that one F-bomb, and I never got in any trouble. So, and there were only a handful of movies that were PG that I could watch with that kind of regularity. But I must have watched, in the 2-3 years after it came out, I must have watched this twice, 3 times a month.
You can get granular on it.
I really can. And I could still, I watched it again fairly recently. I wrote a piece for the Times when Ticket to Paradise came out about George and Julia, as a screen pair, and one of kind of the last we have. So I revisited all of the films they made together. And I found myself still able to recite things word for word. It's a beautifully crafted piece of work. So there we are. So that's why I love Ocean's 11 so very, very much. That's a long-winded answer.
Well, unlike you, I have only seen it twice. When it came
Interesting.
out yesterday.
Yeah.
And I've always, it wasn't that I've been avoiding it. I've always thought of it fondly. It's one of my favorite of his movies, but I just hadn't gotten around to it. And the ease and confidence and charm of the filmmaking were so apparent right from the get-go that it was like slipping into like the perfect bath. It was just, and I want there's an image in it that sort of stuck in my head as a fractal for the movie as a whole, and it's the bit where Yang, the acrobat, is building a house of cards on a diving board, and he's perfectly still, and he's placing the last card on this huge house of cards, and just the balance.
Yeah,
that to me felt like what the movie feels like.
That's
on a diving.
Oh, that's great.
That is perfectly put together and never falls.
But
I want to talk a little bit about genre, because one of the pleasures of watching movies like this is that everybody knows the heist genre. You come to it with a bunch of assumptions. You come to it wanting to see those assumptions catered to, but also played with and subverted. And the basic genre is here. It's a heist. Here's the problem to be surmounted. Here's the challenge to be met. Here's the it's a procedure. It's a procedural movie. It's all about the procedure and the people carrying it out. So there's almost a structural blueprint we carry in our heads when we're watching it. And the pleasure is in the variations on the theme, the things that can go wrong, and do go wrong and will go wrong, but then the ways they turn out right. And this movie plays with it in ways that I think are conscious but not self-conscious. In ways that invite the audience in to, oh yeah, this blueprint as well as we do. So we're going to play with it, but we're not going to rub their faces in it. And I do think one of the issues with some of the sequels is that they do play a sort of three-card Monte game with the audience.
I can say that.
Don't play entirely fair in a way that this film, I think, plays 99% fair. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. Yes, yeah. And I like the sequels, but I this is definitely my favorite of the bunch, and I think I've never really thought about it in those terms, but I think that is probably one of the reasons for that. I think that also, you know, what's interesting in thinking about the movie from the viewpoint that you're talking about, from a perspective of procedural, is that, you know, I think maybe one of the reasons that we don't, that Soderbergh is not sort of elevated to the contemporary canon the way that some of his contemporaries are, is that, you know, we don't think of his films as personal, you know, because he is a journeyman, because he likes to dabble in different genres, and just because of the sort of analytical approach that he can take to things. I think we think that we don't really know him from his movies the way we do with you know, a lot of other filmmakers at the moment. But I think this movie and some of the other films in the filmography, I think this movie is weirdly personal, because it's about process. And I think he is extremely process oriented. I think it's clear in the work, and he's also talked about this. I've seen interviews with him about it. So the way that, you know, all of the ways that you just broke down the structure of the picture is, I think, also a lot of how he thinks about making a movie, you know, and that putting together a movie on this scale with this cast, with these stakes financially, is for him a lot like Yang putting together that house of cards on the diving board. Like, you know, and the fact that he so often addresses when you said, you know, that there's a problem and you have to solve it, like, that's how he talks and thinks about directing, you know, that the scene that he was working on and struggling with on the day that those Oscar nominations came out was one that, like, presented a problem to be solved. And it was the scene, not deep into the heist proper, where they're trying to get the box with Yang inside it through the security clearance. Yep. That was, he couldn't figure out how to cover all the dialogue, see everything that needed to happen, reiterate that Yang was there, and get him through the door. He didn't have it. And he had to, like, walk away from it and solve it and come back. And that was when he realized, all we care about is Yang's in the box, so just push in on Yang in the box, and there we go. You know,
does he storyboard? Does he storyboard?
No, I don't think he does. I don't think he does, because, and especially, you know, Traffic was the first. This was the second film where he was his own cinematographer.
Right. And that's where he storyboards, probably.
Yeah, he, like, finds it in the viewfinder when he's doing it. But, and, you know, and I remember at the time that there was a lot of conversation about that, and he talked about it a lot. Just that for him, the reason he wanted to do that was not even so much that he fancied himself a great cinematographer or that it was an ego thing or anything. It's clearly not an ego thing because he takes a pseudonym. That he wanted that proximity to the action and to the actors. That he was tired of sitting in front of a video monitor 20 feet away. Right. That he wanted to be as much in the scene with him as he could. That is another problem that he figured out how to solve, you know. And
I would argue that this is another aspect that makes him, you know, a Hoxian within that approach to work, in that it is about process. It's about having fun within that process. And part of the process is looking at groups of men and women working. And you can point to a number of his films. His films seem sort of divided between groups of people addressing a problem and loners. I'm thinking of the Limey, and I'm thinking of Kimmy, and I'm thinking of, you know, other
the informants,
right? The informant, people who are on the outside trying to get in, and you could argue, and I want to get into this, that this huge cast in Ocean's 11 has both of those. Because this movie is among many other things, it's about rank. It's about rank of human endeavor. It's about ranks of celebrity and stardom of the not just the people in the movie, but the people playing them. And it has great fun with that.
Yeah, big time.
In fact, if you don't mind, I'd kind of like to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Because this is a movie that it's a heist movie, and in any heist movie, there's the brains and there's the hands.
Yep.
You know? And the brains assemble the hands.
Yeah, and that's always a big centerpiece sequence in here, as it always is. Yes, that's part of the absolutely
right. So you have George Clooney, who's basically one half of the brain, and Brad Pitt is the other half of the brain, sitting down and saying to Elliot Gould. Elliot Gould says, "Who do you have in mind?" And then we get this laundry list.
Too. And you're gonna need a crew as nuts as you are. Who do you got in mind?
That beautiful David Holmes cue. Like, I can't rave about this score enough. Like, it's such a fun, frolicking. So much of the energy of the movie comes from that music. But when you said that line, when you said, "Who do you got in mind?" Like, I hear in my head, no, and the music is like off, and we're playing.
And I would argue that that's one of the few Rat Pack
absolutely
leftovers in that it plays with that that Vegas sound of the 60s. Which I'm just thinking about. The actors are lesser celebrities, the actors in the crew are lesser celebrities than Pitt and Clooney. And I love the fact that the brothers, the quote twin brothers, at that point in their careers, Casey Affleck and Scott Caan, they're not the most famous person in their family.
Exactly. That's really interesting. Yeah.
You've got Elliot Gould, you've got Carl Reiner, Don Cheadle doing the most ridiculous Cockney accent on the face of the earth. I mean, comically fake. And all of these, there's Eddie Jemison playing the computer whiz. And all of them are lesser celebrities and pieces of that the brain has to put together. And then there's Matt Damon.
Yes.
And Matt Damon is the one person, and Matt Damon's character, is the one person, Linus, who is the hands but wants to be in the brains.
Yes, has something to prove. Yes.
Right. And is the comedy of his performance. And also think about where Matt Damon was in his career at that point. He wasn't on the level that he is now. He wasn't on the Brad Pitt, George Clooney level. He was getting there. So the comedy, and it's delicious comedy, is that he keeps trying to join the brains, and they're just like, no, not yet.
Yes.
Not yet.
Let's go. Come on. Where are you going? I'm coming with you? No. Oh, no. No. Don't leave me with these guys. Oh.
Yes. And that is one of the things, one of the sort of criticisms you can level at the series, if you want, I don't, but you can, is that there are certain ways in which the sort of continuity from film to film is a little garbled. Part of which is that, like, the second film was not written as an Ocean's movie. Like, it was this other script that was floating around that they adapted into an Ocean's sequel. So there are certain things that sort of, that don't make a lot of sense from one to the other. And, like, I love the third one, but my constant complaint with it is, like, the attempt to explain away the lack of participation from the women, from Julia Roberts, Zeta Jones, is just like, is a toss off to the point that's a little insulting to the audience. Like, I have these little nitpicks, but that thread that you're talking about of Matt Damon's character of Linus trying to prove himself and trying to elevate his stock through his work with this group is a beautifully consistent thread through all three of the movies that really does culminate in the third one, which is very much his movie. And one of the things I love about the series is that each of the three of them sort of has their focal film. That the first film is about George Clooney, the second film is about Brad Pitt, the third film is about Matt Damon. The other thing that's interesting to think about, just in terms of history of your movie history, is that this trilogy tracks roughly a few months off here or there with the Bourne trilogy. That Bourne Identity came out about 6 months after this.
Right.
There's about the same duration between Ocean's 12 and the second Bourne movie. And then the third Bourne movie and the third Ocean's movie came out in the same summer. So, like, while he's playing this character who's, trying to sort of come up the ranks in this series,
Right.
Matt Damon simultaneously is becoming one of the world's biggest movie stars because of this other series that he's in, of similarly, I think, well-crafted, crowd-pleasing, but like not insulting studio filmmaking. So yeah, I agree with that, and that is one of the things that I love about this movie.
That's a really interesting. I wasn't aware of that parallel, and it is reflected in the Ocean's 11 movie, both inside the movie and outside the movie.
What's great about the second one is that apparently when they were making the deals for Ocean's 12 and making the schedules, Matt Damon went to Soderbergh and said, "Hey, I'm like going to be finished, or there was going to be overlap with the shooting of the second Bourne movie," and he's like, "That's going to be really, a lot, it's really tiring. If there's any way that I could do a little less in this one, I would really appreciate it." And instead, he wrote, Soderbergh had him write into the script that Matt Damon wanted to do more, that the character wanted to be more involved, and they gave him more to do in that one just to fuck with him, which I thought was kind of great. Anyway.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the style, the filmmaking style, the visual style. There's a moment early in the film, and I'm going to be showing clips so that the people watching this on YouTube can see.
Mm-hmm.
That is an absolute throwaway moment, but it kind of took my breath away. I replayed it a couple of times, and it literally is a throwaway moment. You're not meant to notice it on the conscious level. It's the scene where Pitt and Clooney are coming out of the card game where Pitt has been trying to teach the Hollywood actors playing themselves, which itself is absolutely hilarious. You have, who do you have? You have Topher Grace, Joshua Jackson, Holly Marie Combs, two people I don't recognize off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And they're playing themselves.
Shane West. Yeah, Shane West is one of them.
And they're playing themselves as idiot Hollywood Brad's trying to learn poker. And there's this, Brad Pitt has this one line that just floored me when Topher Grace makes some idiot observation, but that's correct. And Pitt's character goes, "That's right, Topher."
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, the scene I'm thinking of, they're coming out of the club where they've been playing that game in the back room. And you see Topher Grace come out and start signing autographs for the people outside and in the line because he's playing himself. And again, this kind of like rank, this visual ranking of capability of mastery. There's Topher Grace who's playing himself as an idiot. And then Brad Pitt comes out and comes to the foreground of the shot. Very cool. And then literally George Clooney appears from behind him and comes around in front, and you don't know where he came from because you haven't seen him in the establishing shot. It's one shot.
Right. Yeah.
And you don't see him cross behind him. And the only way they could have shot this is by having Clooney crouch down behind him and then rise up and just sort of swing around him. And it's so graceful, and it puts Clooney on such a visual level of superiority above the Brad Pitt character. It establishes him as in charge, but it's also just this beautiful shot that you're not meant to notice on anything but a subconscious level. I just love it.
Yeah, exactly. No, he talks on the audio commentary, which, like, seriously, one of my sort of greatest tools as I was making the transition from, failed filmmaker to film critic was...
You are the person when people like actually say, yeah, you just wanted to be a filmmaker.
Yes. No, they're right.
That. A lot of people I know don't say, no, we just wanted to be filmmakers.
Yeah.
Right about now. So you're the guy.
I am the guy. And it's made me a better, like, I'm always very upfront about it. And I'll own it because it's made me a better film critic. It's given me a keener understanding of what a fucking miracle it is to make a good movie.
Mm-hmm.
And his audio commentaries, which he stopped doing, I think the last one was The Informant. But he would do them for almost every movie, usually with the screenwriter, and would really break down, again, process, really transparent about how he did what he did. And in the commentary for Ocean's 11, which is a really good one, and he does it with the screenwriter Ted Griffin, talks about wanting this movie to be elegant. Like that was the key word for him in terms of style. That he didn't, having come off of Traffic, which was very rough and tumble, grimy in some spots, and that was appropriate for him, also as the cinematographer learning the ropes, that he really had to up his game considerably on this one, because he wanted it, he wanted it to be smooth and sort of striking and beautiful and elegant. Like that's the word he uses all throughout that. And I think you see that just in terms of there's, first of all, that's a really specific way to shoot Las Vegas that the city does not necessarily lend itself to circa the 21st century, that it's very easy to be sort of neon quiche.
Very snide about it. Right.
Yeah.
Very kitschy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the fact that he said, no, let's, that he didn't want it. There was a very subconscious effort, not subconscious. There was a very conscious effort to not make the Rat Pack circa 2001. Like that to acknowledge the debt, but that he didn't want to fill the soundtrack with, Sinatra songs, and he didn't want to, put in a bunch of fucking winks, because frankly, the original has too many winks.
Yes.
But that, that was the sort of the way he wanted to shoot the city, was to find its beauty, and to underline that. And I think you see that throughout the movie. And I think also without that approach and that way of thinking about it, you don't end up with the Claire de Lune sequence at the end.
Which is beautiful. Yeah. Emotional and emotive in a way that, nothing in the original touches that, or is even interested in touching that. And I do want to talk about the original in a little bit, but finish your thought.
No, I mean, that was it. That it's just that when you want to talk about a filmmaker who, and he strikes me as this way, and again, in interviews that I've read and the way he will talk about a movie, he is very much one for sort of seizing on an idea, going in and sort of orienting his entire approach around that idea. Sometimes it's a thematic idea, sometimes it's a visual idea, sometimes it's just, sort of an idea about form, but that the elegance was his sort of organizing principle for this picture.
Right. And I don't think you could say that about the original. And I have repaid a visit, done a return visit to the 1960 Sinatra movie, which, honestly, the first time I saw it, which was probably around the time of of the Soderbergh remake, and I was not impressed. I thought it was actually pretty a lousy piece of work. Although, a gem of cinematic brilliance next to some of the Sinatra Rat Pack movies that followed, like Robin and the Seven Hoods, and they're just terrible movies. But I have watched the original Ocean's 11 more recently, and I think it holds up as a product of its time, and that time, unfortunately, is not a good time for filmmaking.
Right.
It's 1960. It's before New Hollywood, but after the death of the studios, and Sinatra and Dean, can kind of do what they want, which is just have a party.
Yeah. No, I'm currently reading, actually, this is just a weird coincidence. I'm currently reading James Kaplan's 2-part Sinatra biography.
Yes.
And this is the point I'm at in it right now. It's like the 60s. And just, I think it's hard for modern film goers, film lovers, film critics. I think it's hard for us to understand how fully committed they were to half-assing these movies. Yeah. Like how, like the extent of their disinterest in doing any more than the bare minimum every single time. That
for them was the charm. That for them, and for the audiences, it was the charm. That was
initially
Dean Martin's entire persona.
Yeah, it was a really tricky balance because yes, they had become so renowned for this, these Vegas shows where one of them would be doing an appearance at the Sands, and then the other two would just like show up in the audience and start heckling him, and they'd all go on stage and, cut off each other's songs and make jokes and, talk about broads and, get drunk. And like and the impression I get from this book, which is, not a hatchet job, but it holds no illusions either, is that this was a very charming, funny, unique, unusual shtick when it first started happening in the late 50s. And then it wore out its welcome pretty quickly. And that it got old a lot sooner than they got tired of doing it. Yep. But yes, that this was what they thought audiences wanted. And for a while they did. Ocean's 11 1960 was a big commercial hit, and then there was just sort of a steadily decreasing returns on the ones that followed.
And ironically, I think a lot of people in 2001 going to the Soderbergh remake hadn't seen the Sinatra movie, or not in years, but wanted it to be that movie, wanted that sort of Rat Pack charm that because they hadn't experienced it directly, in 40 years, they just kind of had the cultural fumes of it. And so I knew I remember some people being disappointed that Soderbergh's movie wasn't more of an homage to Sinatra. And it's not, it's just,
no.
I feel in a way, it occupies a similar place for me as the Coen Brothers' True Grit.
Yes. Yes.
Which is
very much
movie that remakes a beloved, but not all that great, around 60s classic. And as a result, it's a much, much better movie.
I agree. I 100% agree. And it's funny that you mentioned the Coen Brothers, who were at one point in talks to play the Malloy brothers in Ocean's 11. It's a fun rabbit hole to go down on Google at some point. It's just like, because they were working on this was in talks for a while before they could get it together, get all these schedules together and so forth. And there are some really compelling pieces of almost casting. And I love the cast that they ended up with. And obviously it was the right one. They had the right chemistry. They kept working together. But at one point he was talking to the Coen brothers about playing those roles. At another point, he was talking to Luke and Owen Wilson about that, and ultimately I think they even were cast and had to drop out to go do Royal Tenenbaums, which came out the same holiday season. And
I think Casey Affleck and Scott Caan worked perfectly
beautifully. But clearly, for a time, not only were there other ideas, but he was really stuck on the idea of getting actual brothers to play his brothers, and then backed off.
I know that Mark Wahlberg was almost cast as in the Matt Damon role, which is interesting because they were both at kind of similar places in their career.
Yeah.
But he can't just unplug one and plug the other in. It would be
that chemistry isn't right. And and Mark Wahlberg, who is, I think, kind of a piece of shit, but is a good actor in the right kind of roles.
Mm-hmm.
I think he brings too much of an alpha energy to that, to basically anything he does that just isn't a good fit right there. I can understand why he almost got cast, because he had just done Three Kings and Perfect Storm with George Clooney. So I'm sure that was sort of a no-brainer, but I'm glad they went the other way. The other piece of really compelling almost casting, I think, and again, I'm glad it worked out the way it did, but got very close to Bruce Willis playing the Andy Garcia role. He was originally cast as Terry Benedict, the villain. And his cameo in Ocean's 12 was sort of a make good, because they all sort of regretted that he had to drop out or whatever. I genuinely love Bruce Willis, and I think he is a terrific and underrated actor. But Andy Garcia is just such a perfect blend of sort of curdled charm and genuine menace.
Mm-hmm.
And you understand how Julia Roberts' character, how Tess could fall for him, and why she shouldn't the second he's on screen.
Yeah, I cannot imagine that.
And Willis's villains are not
with Bruce Willis.
Yeah. His villains, and he's played villains well, are not, they are not that kind of sort of like suave villain. So I'm also glad that worked out. Can we talk about George and Julia in this movie just a little bit? Is that
please?
Because among a certain sort of contrarian sect of film Twitter, as it were, it has become fashionable to champion Ocean's 12 as the best of the series, which I think is partly just because it's so indifferently received, at least by critics when it came out, and by audiences, though it certainly made a shitload of money. And now it's very easy to do that sort of, film contrarian thing of being like, no, it's actually secretly the best because, it does these other things, And they're like, I love Ocean's 12. I love the fact that Soderbergh said, I'm not going to do a retread. I'm going to specifically do something that looks and feels differently, and making something that was so sort of French New Wave influenced, obviously, that fucks with the audience in certain ways that they're not going to be ready for, like as a subversive act, as a sort of a prank. I love Ocean's 12, but it's not the
absolute Soderbergh approach. I could
absolutely
doing nothing else.
Absolutely. And Ocean's 13 is also great just on a sort of back to basics level, and saying like, okay, we tried that. Now I'm going to give you what you want, but I'm still going to have some fun with it, and
I also think of Logan Lucky as an unofficial Ocean's 11 sequel.
Yep. Ocean 7-Eleven, as they say in the movie. But what I think Ocean's 11 has that none of the sequels do, that elevates it for me to the top of the heap, is that there is a very specific screwball comedy rhythm dynamic relationship that's happening in the film's two love stories, which is Danny Ocean and Tess, and Danny Ocean and Brad Pitt's character. Like they are just as much in love with each other as him and Tess are. And the way that you can tell that, and the way that it manifests itself in that movie, is in the way these characters talk to each other. And I'm thinking specifically of Danny and Tess in that first restaurant scene. And I'm thinking of Danny and what is Brad Pitt's character's name in this movie?
Rusty.
I know it. Rusty. Good God, thank you. And I'm thinking of the way Danny and Rusty talk to each other in the scene where they're driving away from the celebrity card game. There is a spark in not just how beautifully written the dialogue is and the give and take that's there in Ted Griffin's screenplay, but in the way that those characters relate to each other, in the timing of that dialogue, we've mentioned Hawks before, but to me it's a very His Girl Friday rhythm in those scenes of the way that they can barely wait for the other one to finish what they're saying before they top them. Or bat it back, or joke, or insult, or whatever they're doing that they can't wait to do. It reoccurs in later scenes with both pairs, but it's especially present in those really key, the first time it's just the two of them on screen. And that energy in just dialogue is so woefully, conspicuously absent in so much of mainstream studio filmmaking now, that it just, like, the first time I saw it, it just like knocked me back. That it was like, listen to them fucking talk to each other. It's thrilling.
Who wrote the script? Who wrote the script on Ocean?
Ted Griffin.
So it is. So
went on
Ocean's 12. Actually, it's George Nolfi.
Yep. And again, that was an adaptation of an original non-Ocean script that he had written, from what I understand. But it's just and the sequel films, which are fine screenplays by excellent writers, did not have that same spark to those dialogue scenes. And that, for me, on first view especially, was what made Ocean's 11 so special.
Right. Has he made a screwball comedy? No, I would argue actually that this is
this is it.
This and Logan Lucky, I think, are actually the closest he's come to screwball comedy.
Yep.
Screwball heist movies.
Who'da thunk?
Yeah. This is great. I think we have to wrap it up. Unfortunately, we could go all day. But thank you, Jason Bailey. For those of you who are listening, if you haven't seen Ocean's 11 in a while, go watching it. It is really supremely enjoyable in a way that
Eminently rewatchable. Yeah. I mean, like and the mistake I sometimes make is I'll stumble upon it, on a stream, in progress on like live television. I'll be like, oh, I'll just watch this for 10 minutes before I go to bed. And then it's an hour and a half later, because it's just like, it's every scene, you remember that there's a great scene right after it.
Right. I have movies like that. What's Up, Doc is like that for me.
Oh, hell yeah.
Catch 30 seconds on TV. I'm in.
You're done. Yep. All
right. Thank you, Jason. This has been a wonderful conversation. In the next episode of Classics of the New Millennium, Slate film critic Dana Stevens and I will be talking about 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, the 2007 Romanian drama about abortion and friendship that is, I am sad to say, more relevant today than when it was released. The absolute opposite of the kind of movie we've been talking about today. I am Ty Burr, and you're listening to and watching Ty Burr's Watchcast, part of the Substack newsletter Ty Burr's Watch List. You can find more podcasts, reviews, and tips to navigating the streaming video landscape at tyburswatchlist.substack.com. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Jason Bailey, for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me.